Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining. We're all here together for our 4th episode of Speak Up, in which we discuss some of the most important topics socially and environmentally. I'm really excited to be joined by you all today, all relatively young people, which is very apt because we're going to be talking about young people and climate activism. To start off, I want to ask you my favourite question to ask all climate activists. What has your journey been into climate activism? What was the moment that inspired you to get involved? Or what did you hear or learn that sparked that desire to engage?
So yeah, sure, I don't mind going first. I actually wanted to be an airline pilot since I was 5 years old, very much a working class upbringing, and I was inspired by the Red Arrows at an air show. And yeah, after many challenges, I finally sort of achieved that dream job. A few years into the industry, I had my medical revoked, and sort of my lockdown started a couple of years before everyone else's. And yeah, hypocritically, whilst I was off work, I used my staff travel benefits to go to a country called Peru now in Abiyala. And yeah, I went to a place called Rainbow Mountain, and it had been so-called discovered a couple of years prior because the snow had melted. And it was 100 meters lower than Everest Base Camp. And I'm like standing on top of this beautifully colored Rainbow Mountain looking at it in awe. But there's like thousands of tourists. And the guide from Peru was saying like, Peru was one of the first countries to be hit by the climate crisis. And I'm like, what? You know, like, what's going on? I'm having this first-hand experience of mass tourism and the climate change firsthand, which of course was a privilege to be able to experience that. But I think the seed was really planted there, and that, you know, I probably stayed in denial for a couple more years, but I kind of built an obsession, you could say, around climate science, and the rise of Extinction Rebellion was happening in London. And yeah, I was trying to get my medical back, and I would have got my medical back, but you know, there was sort of no voices within carbon-heavy sectors being represented in the environmental movement. And you know, I desperately wanted to be a part of XR, but I knew it would be kind of career suicide. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and it was like, okay, this is the final straw. We've realised our human vulnerabilities, and the root causes like factory farming and deforestation was not being spoken of. And so yeah, I kind of was asked to do spokesperson training within XR, and yeah, decided to share my story. And obviously I wasn't most popular within the airline industry, and I was ostracised and ridiculed for sharing articles. At the time it was mainstream narrative climate denial. But you know, I could see this trajectory was clear, and sort of as aviation workers, we're trained to think free from bias, to mitigate risk, to preserve life. So if we're not speaking this truth, it just felt like a massive injustice. And I think the statistic that shocked me most was knowing that 80% of the world's people have never even been on a plane, and that they're most disproportionately affected by the climate crisis right now. So yeah, that was about 3 years ago, and you know, been arrested a few times, and sort of noticed also that level of privilege that comes with being able to be arrested in a body racialized as white. So yeah, now trying to really understand what it means to be in true solidarity with our brothers and sisters around the world, and to humbly come at this to try and, you know, be connected to the whole. So yeah, that's enough for me.
I think it's quite interesting. You've got a lot more pilots and airline staff engaged now too with safe landing, is that right? So others have sort of gone on the same journey as you.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So organically through that process of sort of meeting my first Extinction Rebellion local group meeting I went to, I'm sitting there thinking, oh God, what am I going to say? Because I wanted to go back to the industry. We've all gone around introducing ourselves. I said my story, and then the guy sat next to me was an airline pilot cadet for EasyJet, and I was like, what? You know, what's the chances of, you know? And yeah, so that was the beginning of what's now Safe Landing, which is a group for campaigning for long-term employment within the aviation sector. That we've co-founded now, and you know, we're trying to highlight the dangers of the limits of technology and the dangers of growth. So we're lobbying unions and challenging industry stakeholders and stuff. So yeah, trying to make a difference from within the sector as well.
And what about you, Zamzam? You had quite an interesting journey in as well.
Yeah, I think for me it was very different in the sense that I saw the environmental movement as a space that I didn't belong to. So I did a lot of, I guess, like racial justice work. I used to do a lot of campaigning on the prevent agenda, like counterterrorism within higher education. We used to do a lot of campaigning on Islamophobia. But when it came to environmentalism, I never saw it reflected in my lived experiences. So I am Somali originally, and I come from historically, my father's fathers were farmers, right? And they had these beautiful lands that became essentially barren and unable to be used in 2012 during like the mass droughts that happened in Somalia. And I remember seeing that and being frustrated, but not understanding the impacts of like how that's even been brought about. But also understanding that and linking the thing of like, nobody cares about those lives and those lives are seen as disposable, and very much a lot of the activism that I was doing on racial justice, like Black lives were seen as disposable. So when I started, when I was actually elected as Vice President of the National Union of Students, one of my remits was the sustainability department. So I had to work with the sustainability department, and I was like, I don't care for plastic straws. I'm not here to plant trees. I've got real life issues that I'm going through, but I had a really important discourse with the entire department. I remember there's an incredible and talented staff team that genuinely were ready to hear the criticism that I wanted to give, and actually wanted to radically reform the work that they were doing. And I think that was refreshing to be how do we repurpose the work, because actually the vision is to be just and sustainable, and there's a recognition that the environmental sector as a whole is completely failing in its mission, because you can't tackle an issue if you don't understand the vast majority of people that are experiencing the impact of the climate crisis aren't on the table, aren't even able to raise how they'd like to see change done and how they'd like to be part of that conversation. So that kind of was what empowered me into it. I was like, actually, I see a way through this. I can see that these people actually genuinely care about doing this work, and there's an ability for me to be able to have an important voice and a marker in making that change. So that's kind of how SOS UK was born as well, in ensuring that the work that we did was radical, and it was able to challenge the status quo and also the entire environmental sector as it moves into now different spaces than it was before, when I was within NUS UK, within its very closed metrics of a department. Now it's its own entity which is led by students, and I think that has allowed it to essentially be a part of movements and build movements and support movements. And I think that's how you bring about change. And for me, I'd much rather be a part of a movement and have a vision that's bigger than myself, and bring people together than to be in terms of this restrictive organisations where we have these tick boxes of what sustainability is and what it looks like, and how we define environmentalism within this specific scope. And so yeah, I think for me, seeing the power essentially that you can create in challenging something and bringing well-intentioned people together to build a movement bigger than yourself is what was got me really excited and passionate. So I took that anger and frustration and disappointment into some really useful action.
Nice. And you were talking about, not planting trees or plastic straws alone, but what does really tangible climate action look like to you then, with your work especially?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like, I think the core of it, specifically a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of intersectional activism, right? It means it's ensuring that the work that we do is rooted in justice. And so actually it's repurposing everything that you do from the very beginning, and understanding where does injustice leap into this? Like, where does privilege lie? Who has privilege in that space? And how do you unbalance those power paradigms? Because I mean, it's easy to plant a couple of trees. It's easy to change plastic straws to paper, but like actually, who does that affect? And what does that affect? And what does that really mean? Like, who does it make you? Does it make you feel better? Does it actually have impactful change? And I remember like one of the things that when I was NUS president, one of the biggest issues that there was like contention with the sustainability department and like one of our disabled students officer was that like actually it's an access issue to have like paper straws. And like it caused a lot, and then there was like this whole thing of like unions misunderstanding and just falling into what we call like more the way in which mass media presents sustainability to us, right? Like what we think is like cool and hip and able to do, and it's like, who does that privilege? Like who is that useful for? And sustainability can't be you doing good. Like there's a quote by Leela Watson that I think is useful. And it's that if you're here to help me, don't help me at all. But if you're here to work with me because you've got also something to gain, then like let's work together. And that's like a principle to live by, because the reality is that we've all got a part to play. Reality is the global South are facing like the biggest impact in this, but if we don't humanize those experiences and we don't understand and feel that actually what they're going through and what they're experiencing is inherently linked to us, then we're kind of failing as humans. And like we should genuinely like sit with that uncomfortability and that pain.
We should all be in it together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, your work's really inspiring. Thanks so much for everything you're doing. And Sacha, you too, you're doing a lot at the moment, juggling huge amount of different bits of work. So do you want to tell me what your journey into climate activism was?
Yeah, sure. It's incredible to hear about both of your stories. I love this question because I think it often illuminates kind of a counter narrative to the prevailing rhetoric, which is that activism looks one way, and there's one way to be a good activist or a perfect activist. And I know that I struggle a little bit with the label of activist, and I know that some other people do as well, because it really conjures up these very particular images of how you should behave or how you should act or even how you should look, what age you should be. And so I think these conversations are great for kind of busting open that narrative. For me, I grew up in Western Canada in the Rocky Mountains, and I was hugely privileged to have easy access to beautiful swaths of nature. But I also grew up in the home of the oil sands for most of North America and most of Canada. And I grew up with a little bit of cognitive dissonance because I had this gorgeous nature in my backyard, and then equally I would read the news and I would learn that in that same backyard they were drilling for oil, and that oil was indirectly responsible for pollution, for carbon emissions, and for lots of pain and grief for people within my own country and outside of my country. So when I went to university, I decided that I wanted to study environmental science because I was like, that's the way to solve it. I'm gonna go to school, I'm gonna learn about the issues, and I'm gonna solve the problems. And I think I had really thought that there was like one easy fix, one magic bullet. And when I got to school, I met seas of students who were able to sit glassy-eyed and sit through lectures about failing crops, mass famine, extreme climatic events, and I was taught for the years of my degree that in order to make any meaningful impact in the world, you had to essentially vaccinate yourself against emotion, against feeling, and instead of traveling into that grief and that injustice and those deep feelings of hurt and betrayal, rather you had to distance yourself from them in order to have that impact. And needless to say, by the time I was in my third year, I was feeling completely disillusioned. equally because where I went to school, I really struggled with the narrative around what we can do to solve the crisis. We talked about, energy companies and about my home in Alberta. And when the economy collapsed in 2008, obviously a lot of people lost their jobs, and it didn't necessarily disadvantage just the CEOs going around in their cars, on their flashy airplanes. It was my friends whose dads drove the trucks that took the bolts to the pipelines, who all of a sudden couldn't afford their lunch. And I couldn't reconcile this kind of approach to environmentalism that required us to just think about carbon in the atmosphere and polar bears in far-flung places and reusable straws, when it was people and vulnerable people, disadvantaged people, who were suffering the most. So I was recommended by a friend to read an article about a young activist named Clover Hogan. And I got online and I went on The Guardian, and this was as the pandemic was hitting in my third year of university. And I read this article, and it was the first time that I had ever seen somebody introduce the concept of the fact that mental health can affect the way that we respond to things like the climate crisis. And in fact, she argued that instead of our grief or our feelings or our anxiety being the antithesis to action, in fact, those were proof of our compassion. And those were our strongest fuel for our conviction that there could be change. And that was what made young people such powerful vessels for change. And I was so compelled by this idea because I was like, I'm allowed to have feelings about this. And so I reached out to her. I found her contact on Instagram. And I was just a third year environmental science student at the time from like a small town in Alberta. And I said, I'm really compelled by this idea. These are some of my thoughts. I have further questions about this concept of eco-anxiety. It feels strange to label it. I want to understand more about it. Email me if you ever want to chat. And 3 months later, I had returned back home because of the pandemic, and I got an email from her. And she was like, hey, just making my way through my emails. And she shared with me that she was starting a small organization called Force of Nature. Didn't have any money to bring through the door yet, but that the entire intention was just to create spaces for young people to connect around these difficult and complicated emotions about the climate crisis and about the challenges that we're facing, because there are very few spaces that invite that kind of discourse. And that summer, we hosted open Zoom rooms. We weren't sure what it was going to look like. And we talked to 500 young people from around the world. There was this outpouring of need from young people to come forward and talk about these issues, and not just from the UK, from Canada, from Australia, but from Pakistan, from Nigeria, from Brazil, from Philippines. Wow. It was, quite honestly, like we didn't even have the resource to manage it or handle it. And very quickly we realized that we had stumbled upon a niche and a need for peer-to-peer support for young people as they're navigating these difficult problems. So Force of Nature was born. And that was 3 years ago, I believe. And 2 years ago, I worked through my bachelor's degree, and then 2 years ago, I moved to the UK. And I met Clover for the very first time, because I hadn't had the chance to obviously meet her before this. And now we have a team of, I think, 14 people. And we work across 52 countries with young people, understanding and learning how to hold space for those difficult and complicated emotions. And really, the entire premise behind what we do is understanding that the threat, even greater than the climate crisis, is how powerless we feel in the face of it. And that powerlessness is really created by people in positions of power who benefit from us feeling like we have to tackle the problem as individuals. It's, 100 companies that have 71% of emissions in the world, and yet we're told the only way to address the climate crisis is to eat vegan or to feel bad about the clothes you wear. I walked in here today, and full transparency, I had gone downstairs and gotten a coffee in a reusable cup, a disposable cup, and I transferred into my Keep cup because I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot to use that, and I'm gonna get shamed if I don't do that. And obviously those individual actions are important for kind of cultivating our agency and also demonstrating that it's something we care about, but we have been duped into tackling it as individuals. And so it's really about creating that collective consciousness of caring about this and of solidarity, understanding really like who benefits from us feeling like we are the problem.
I saw you two agreeing a lot with that.
No, absolutely. It was just. Well, I think one of the things I always like to highlight is that the whole concept of the carbon footprint was coined by VP. Like it's literal oil companies that were like, oh damn, we're doing really bad things to the planet. Like how do we make people think that they're the problem? Oh yeah, we'll create the carbon footprint and like we'll put it on them. And that's literally, so this whole idea of like, oh yeah, I need to monitor my carbon footprint has come from them, right? Because they are literally like creating such a problem, and that individualizing the problem is a tactic to keep people like hopeless, right? Like we live in a world where like people there's so much more individualism in the way in which we do stuff. Like there's a lack of like understanding of like actually like how does collectivism like benefit me and my community and the people around me, and then like what does that look like in like a wider ecosystem? And it's so true. I think like the like conglomerates are so invested in like creating as much apathy as they can, right? And like and you do that by like dividing people, right? And like and this idea that like this is this problem and like they're dealing with that problem, and you find that in spaces as well, like where like in the climate movement, like where as young people, like we're trying to tackle these issues and we're trying to come together, and often almost always as like something is put in place in front of us. And I think one of the most powerful things in like the student movement, like I've been on like panels with Clover, and like when she's spoken about like eco-anxiety and like and I think it's the ability for us to actually like cut through a lot of BS, to be honest, because like we like the one thing I love about Twitter is that like somebody will call you out. Like you can't lie, right? And young people are like, just wait a minute, I'm gonna find like what this person said in 2017 because I'm pretty sure they're lying, or like I'm gonna FOI this organization and find out like what's happening internally. Like we have so much at our disposal, and also we have the ability to like everyone like we're able to build movements in ways that you weren't before, because like I can go on Twitter today and like start a movement and a campaign around something, and people that are like-minded, that are like, yeah, this is really important to me too, Zamzam, will join it, right? You don't have to be there is no need to be a physical presence. There's no need to like have specific expertise, knowledge on like whatever it is. It's like you just gotta care, right? And I think that's what really like the like the power within like young people that has like I guess got somewhat tackled the level of apathy that's been created like for us. Like we're like, actually, I care about this, and like this person has been able to articulate it in a way that I understand, and has been able to also speak about it in a way that I can relate to, you know. And I think that's really like what's important and powerful and really exciting as well, actually.
Oh wow, yeah. I'm just feeling so like it's so refreshing to be in a space where I'm hearing people talk about their emotions. I've actually diagnosed with eco-anxiety, and it's something that I had to push for within the Civil Aviation Authority because my job shouldn't feel inherently violent. And ultimately, like I've had the help of my therapist, Caroline Hickman, who like studied 10,000 young people, and you know, from I think 15 to 25, it's like, yeah, the level of despair and anxiety that is there. You could call it eco-empathy as well, but it's really just kind of, for me, there's feeling into that pain in a society that's seemingly so detached from our emotions has been transformative for me, and to find the wisdom within that. Those feelings, to just, you know, have a day. I often just take a day sometimes to just sit, and if I need to cry, then I'm going to cry, because, you know, the level of devastation we're being confronted with is something the human race has never had to confront psychologically. It's impossible. How could one individual ever be able to confront this emotionally and to know what to do? So we have to come together. We have to, you know, find our strength in each other, and yeah, it's.
I think also something that is really interesting about when we think about climate and mental health and how we deal with a rapidly changing world with calm heads, cool hearts, it requires us really fundamentally to kind of redistribute where we look to for solutions and really to decolonize our approach as well. Because many of the parts of the world right now that are already experiencing the climate crisis are in the global south. And if we are to learn what the consequences of the climate crisis are, then we need to look to communities who are already experiencing it. And equally, if we want to understand the incredible resilience and people-centered solutions to things like climate and mental health and eco-anxiety, it's looking to those communities and platforming those voices and understanding who has not been in the room, who has historically been excluded from that discourse, and who can we really learn from by way of those people-centered solutions.
So Sacha and Zamzam, you both anticipated probably my next 3 questions. You mentioned Clover Hogan. Is there any other young climate activists who have particularly inspired you, and why?
Daphne, of course, yeah, it's
Oh
Daphne
my gosh,
Grace.
she is
And
amazing.
And then I recently did a course with her, but Daphne genuinely inspires me. Like she's such a cool person and like such a strong person. Like recently went through cancer as well, stage 4. Hodgkin's, and it's just like her entire energy, like it's like I feel like she encapsulates the student movement, like the youth movement, the climate movement, like
and she's so
the
playful.
resilience of and like she's honest. I'm in awe of her. I love her so much, and like I'm like very like honored and privileged to call her a good friend of mine. But yeah, she's one of the people that I'm just like. Yeah, I need, if I'm feeling like really down or something, she's the kind of person I would call up and be like, let's chat, like I need to vent.
It's particularly incredible, isn't it, when it's really young people stepping up, the courage that they've found to present themselves in public and raise their voices in that way at such a young age about such an emotive issue.
Definitely.
Are there any others who particularly inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, Daphne Frias is a huge, huge inspiration to me. I was lucky enough to meet her a couple months ago when she was doing an event here in London, and she was speaking, and I just absolutely bawled while she was talking, just went to absolute shambles. And I pulled myself together before I went and spoke to her afterwards, because I was like, you don't need my tears or my, emotions. But I just had to share with her how incredible her entire attitude is, because she has this playfulness and this joy, and also this kind of like bluntness that I think is a real is one of the things that make young people so compelling as climate activists. And I mean, like, climate activism is what we're discussing right now, but we stand on the shoulders of young people who have come before us in every movement, every social justice movement, in every earth-shaking or society-changing movement that has happened. It has been young people working in collaboration with those who have experience and knowledge to really like push the agenda of change. And I think it's young people who have that sort of moral imperative, who have that ability to say, but why? Like, why are we doing things the way they are? Why can't we, change the system? Why can't we challenge it? And I think also, like, young people have, quite honestly, like, the most to lose in this situation. If I'm being blunt about it, we are the generation that is going to inherit the climate crisis. I speak with young people who talk at length about, not wanting to have a family or thinking differently about where they're going to live, where they're going to work. Because they are told these stories about their future, a future that they have not created, that they've been handed by people who were appointed to be custodians of that future and who have fundamentally failed. And so I think that for me, it's young people who speak with that authenticity and with that kind of genuine take no BS attitude that I really, really love and take a lot of energy from. Another one that I could think of is Tori Choi. I don't know if you guys know her, and she is an incredible activist from Bristol, originally from Hong Kong, and she speaks at length about kind of environmentalism and mental health, and then also about sort of the barriers to getting involved in activism and about the accessibility concerns around who gets to be an activist, what is the privilege of being an activist, and how can we democratize and redistribute the ability to be activists, especially to more young people who are thinking they're facing this pivotal point in their life where they're like, okay, am I going to enter into a system that I don't necessarily agree with and that I have issues with, but because I need to sustain myself and I need to make a living and I need to support my family or my community, especially if you are, first generation at university, if you come from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background, you have to make those difficult choices, and then society moralizes them and say, oh, you don't care about, the planet, so you're working in this industry. And it's like, no, I actually care about my community. So that's why I love that you talk so much about that concept of environmental justice. Like, it's people-centered, it's community-centered. What's good for your community is also what's good for the planet, and vice versa.
Yeah. So many, I think it'd be unfair to start dropping names, but as you were talking, I was actually one person that I met, and then I'm in adoration of the work that he's doing is Jeremiah Foster, who's working within the White House as one of the young people, and the work that he's doing is just so refreshing as a young person. And then there's Scarlett, does a lot of climate education policy, has been at the forefront of our climate education work. Seeing her as a woman of color, a young woman of color, pushing that work, is just, it's incredible for me to see as well. Especially in the very beginning when I was involved in the work of SOS UK and the development of that. I was always in essentially very Eurocentric white spaces, and I was very much always the person saying the one thing, and but now being able to kind of feel I'm a part of a family of people that are doing really important work and are challenging each other as well. It's interesting because we challenge each other in a lot of that work. So there's just loads, but those two I am also in adoration of and love a lot. Sorry, I know
it's all right.
Is there any that you wanted to add to the?
I mean, the person I admire most is quite an obvious person, but I think I'm going to mention her anyways. It is Greta, and the reason for that is because, when I was still in the midst of this industry, on this trajectory of worrying about my pension and how much money I was going to earn, when I could pay off my mum and dad, and just the complete capitalist dream. And obviously recognising the way the culture puts someone on a pedestal like that and makes someone a celebrity. Yeah. But at the same time, what I saw from her through the media did help me sort of see someone that was courageously walking the walk, if you like, and sort of not only making individual actions, but really holding leaders to account on the international stage. And then later meeting and filming her at COP26, but then seeing her organise this space in a park outside of the main function area, and basically just have all the world's media there, and then just introduce herself and then pass a mic. And we heard from the most inspiring stories from our brothers and sisters around the world, and it's that just the level of respect I have for her and many other young people.
She has that bluntness you're talking about, where she really says it like it is.
But I think all of the young people that we mentioned, what they do really powerfully and really and recognizes their privilege, and they use their platform to platform others, right? And so I think what you mentioned, specifically, I remember COP26. She attended I remember the march that we had, the climate march, but then it was the indigenous communities that were at the forefront and walked with them, and it's always understanding that yes, of course, as a white woman from Sweden, which is the country I was born in, is there's a level of privilege that comes with being platformed and being put in a pedestal and being upheld, and therefore you play a role in challenging that actively. And young people do, I think, from what I've seen, a lot of the young campaigns that I've run and been a part of, as young people, we are more comfortable to do that, actually, to be I'm very privileged. I know I've been called to do this because I have these privileges, but I'm gonna give this platform up for you. because it's more important, it'll impact the work. And that's what it means to understand like collectivism, right? To understand that like actually for us to be able to achieve what we need to achieve, I need to be able to pull you up, and it's not a favor, right? It's something I should be doing. That's what like rebalancing power looks like.
Movement building as well. Yeah.
It's absolutely vital. And I think it is lucky, it's fortunate that young people are especially waking up to that.
Yeah.
And Generation Z, I don't know if you know, they are the largest generation in the world. There's about 2 billion of them. So if that's one thing I was thinking, like if you mobilised all young people, that would be a lot of people. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think are some of the hurdles that are maybe preventing young people in particular, from getting involved in climate activism?
I mean, there's so many reasons, isn't there? A young person, on the one hand, this culture is saying you've got to go and get your education and focus on your career to succeed and survive. But then on the other hand, there's like, well, if you go there and waste your time there, then you won't have a future. And it's an impossible situation, and sort of parents could be, you know, not necessarily supportive or understanding of the climate biodiversity crisis. And yeah, I think there's also like probably too many adults in the climate space that don't give enough voice to the wisdom of young people.
I think 2 reasons. One, I think like acknowledging that there's a level of privilege that exists with just being even able to articulate ourselves in the way and our own lived experiences in a way that can be translated and understood by wider people, right? And I say this knowing that like Zamzam a couple of years ago would have never even felt like she could be sat across on this very table, right? And there was a lot of like learning and unlearning and also just being given tools by I guess the incredible people that came before me, for me to be able to feel like I can voice, you know, the lived experiences that I've had as a woman. But also I think that the other thing is that like if I don't have, like if my biggest day-to-day battle is like I don't have food to eat, right? I don't have I don't know how I'm going to feed my kids or support, like pay rent, like we're living in a society. Unfortunately, like the reality is that like we live in a world where like there's so much barriers that exist to like our very own basic human rights aren't being fulfilled, right? And it's like what capitalism does, it causes like all these other issues and problems, and it places it on individuals, and therefore like you feel like that is something of less importance, but actually not understanding that it links together. Like there's a reason as to like why companies are profiting, and therefore like if you look at the energy crisis, and people don't make a connection between like the energy crisis that we're supposedly in, and like how that impacts like the exploration of oil, and how that affects like what they're paying, and how the government essentially puts people at the very bottom. It's for the people it seeks to represent at the very bottom of the food chain, and ensures that like it maximizes profits for like these private entities, right? And people don't make that connection because they're in a position where they're not even like have the capacity to make that connection, right? So I think there's like a level of privilege, first of all, like understanding that like to be able to get up, campaign, like there's a lot of time and energy that goes into it. Like as activists and campaigners, we become burnt out, we get tired. We do a lot of this work like for free, like we don't get paid to do this. And there's like a huge like human cost in pouring yourself into something that you care so much about, and like hitting a wall consistently. And also I think the other side of it is that there is so much like ignorance and like undermining of young people, like consistently like, oh, this is cute, you seem to be doing adorable work, like, oh, look at these young people like coming together, like when
you'll grow up someday.
Yeah, like, oh, you'll grow up and you'll see the world slightly differently.
Yeah.
And very quickly, what are the main way we can overcome these hurdles? Is what as young people, how can they overcome this hurdle?
I would say that There are a number of ways that young people could overcome it, but I would actually flip that around as an invitation, because I do think that there are so many ways that young people can get more involved, but the problems that we're talking about are systemic. And I actually think that it's about young people demanding that the system change, quite honestly, to make space for us to occupy. I think that the responsibility is on young people, obviously, to have that energy and to step up, but we are facing those barriers. There's those accessibility concerns, and when we talk about things like the cost of living crisis, there's nothing that makes me angrier than seeing an advertisement on the side of a bus about how to use less energy in your home when companies are benefiting from hiking up the prices so much. It's like, it shouldn't be on those individuals to use less energy. It should be on the companies to charge less of the energy, and for the government to stop taking money and accepting money from those enormous companies. So I think there's so many ways that we can open spaces and create avenues for young people, and not just any young people, but young people of all different walks of life, to step up and grab those solutions. And also, I think that one of the biggest barriers to access that I see for young people is that we're told that the only way to exercise activism is either to be a campaigner or to be a green consumer, which is just capitalism in a trench coat. Yeah. Like, it's the exact same thing. It's like, oh, you want to be an activist? Okay, let me moralize the socks you wear, let me moralize the food you eat, let me moralize the coffee you drink, and let me make you feel bad about all of it, and let me charge a sustainability premium for it. And I think that that is one of the biggest barriers, because it's the same people who are still benefiting from it. It's the British Petroleum turned beyond petroleums of the world that are really loving the fact that we're attracted to, like, basically shame mongering on packaging.
I love that.
I think that brings us to a nice
coat and a green
conclusion as well. Yeah.
It's like, so that's a bar. I like that.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. I think we could talk about this for a good few hours longer, as you all have so much to say. So yeah, it's been really interesting. I think we came to a nice conclusion with young people taking collective action and opening up access to people from all different backgrounds is really important. So thanks so much for your thoughts. It's been really nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Blythe.
Yeah, thank you so much. Lovely to meet you guys.
Likewise.
It was great meeting you.